Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Viga character review. This is actually the fourth time I've recorded this because honestly I keep waffling on my thoughts, but I think I finally have it narrowed down. So today's presentation, pretty straightforward. The character overview, base and total stat analysis leading up to the report card where we look at those stats, context of the rest of his kit. We'll go through the class and job overview to kind of give some background as to my thoughts as we make our way to the general thoughts section. Most importantly here, we kind of talk about everything now that we have the full picture, and then we'll look at the job-based vision card eligibility, Esper Synergies, and weapon optimization. So, kicking things off, brand new lightning unit added this week. They've given him the unique main job of Servant of the Void, Jealousy, with the Martialist and Dragoon subjobs. They've given him the Axe type weapon, which we haven't seen in quite some time. Also equips hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. Now, from a weapon resistance perspective, 20% to strike and 20% to magic. That strike one we obviously saw with Reagan, but that's kind of niche nowadays in terms of what characters certainly get up to. He also has 10% to slash, neutral at 0% to missile, and only minus 5% to pierce as his only weakness. Now, from a faith perspective, I do think he is a 70 to 97 faith unit, given that he has that innate magic resistance, but he also has some status effects you'll want to lean into. So, you should be cognizant of what you can be afflicted by. For status elements, he does have an innate 50% resistance to berserk as well as poison, and 10% to confusion. Honestly, not some of the worst ones here. Could be a little bit better, but overall, I do think there's some value there. Now, when we look at the base stats, from a HP perspective, actually exceptionally high here for base HP. This is one of the biggest strengths in his kit that we'll see throughout the entire presentation here. Very, very high base HP overall. When we look at base attack, definitely a step below what many of the top tier damage dealers have, but 400 is still very, very serviceable, and he will still achieve very high levels of attack, so this is not a problem at all, as you'll end up seeing. Agility-wise, relatively middle of the pack here, but coming in at 57, so neither good nor bad. The dexterity just slightly above average here, and the luck basically average as well. And so the main takeaway here is he has some good strengths, particularly from the HP perspective, but no real weaknesses right here out of the gate from a base stat perspective. And as we transition those to kind of the summarized chart here, relative to other UR units, again, kind of reiterating, there's no real weaknesses per se. When you add in the board stats, the master ability, things of that nature, there are some small changes here, some good, some bad. They do opt, and we'll see here in terms of the sources of some of these stats, they opt to give him a HP percentage board node instead of attack, which is why he maintains that relative HP strength, takes a step back on the attack, and they absolutely gyp him on dexterity, only giving him 26 on the board, which definitely puts him below average from a dexterity perspective, and we'll see that reflected again in just a couple slides here. Now, when we look at the agility overall, again, these two lines are without passives and with passives. Without the passives, he's actually relatively average from an agility perspective. He does get him to a new tier of characters, though, when you do equip his 12% agility passive, though. Definitely recommended, as we'll see in a couple slides looking at those passive options. When we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, now, he is very low on the dexterity side, and many damage dealers typically get some kind of critical hit percentages on their board nodes. He does not, so he does remain relatively low here from a crit rate perspective, which obviously affects some potential damage output, particularly when you talk about lightning as a cast, because they do have a lot of crit damage intertwined with their vision cards and espers and whatnot, but overall not a high critical hit rate unit. And from a crit avoidance rate, basically in the middle, neither here nor there, a strength or weakness. Now we look at the accuracy. This is definitely something to be cognizant of. He is one of the worst accuracy characters in the game, but not without good reason. He technically has 3 kinds of guaranteed hit in this kit. Not necessarily a concern when you're talking about hitting evade units. Obviously that nullify sure hit does have some interaction here you got to be careful of. But overall, when you quit passives, he is amongst some of the worst in the game from an accuracy perspective. Now evasion, not an evade unit. Next topic, nothing really to say there. Now for the report card, when we look at the overall effective HP, Viga comes in at an A+ here. I'm actually very surprised where he ended up. He's actually above Sephiroth when it comes to effective HP and only behind Thancred in terms of non-tank units. It really is because of that base HP, what they did with some of his total stats, and a little bit of what they give him for that 12 and 8 defense. Now you can't get another 12 on a passive, which is where I'm getting that 24 number that you see here. He does have 0 and 8 spirit, 15 unit resistance as well, no AoE resistance. And we will look at the other forms of survivability. He's also got re-raise and courage, both of them on the main and sub job, which are part of his opening rotation. He does have access to a physical barrier and a buff for another 20% to strike and magic resistance, and technically protect capable on different sub-job as well. So a few different ways to build him. Now I think this A+ is slightly overrating his survivability by and large, but from an effective HP perspective, he is top of the charts. Now primary stat, going with an A- here, good base attack. He does have two different kinds of attack passives. We'll, bump that back up. He's got some modifiers on his abilities that will slide up the more damage he takes. So that in conjunction with up to 80% slash res pen innately or 80 defense pen innately, you can obviously play with that externally too. And I have a lot to say about that on the general thoughts in just a couple slides here. The agility, I'm going with a B here. 78 agility versus 77 being the average when you have those vision cards equipped. If you equip his passive, puts him at 84 versus the average of 80 with passive. So overall, definitely in that B tier of what you can achieve for overall agility. Accuracy-wise, going with an F, but throwing that asterisk on there where he does rely on 2 guaranteed hits and has a counter ability that is also a guaranteed hit. So, obviously still want to throw some accuracy in the build somewhere so you're not missing on like tanks that are mediocre luck. But yeah, definitely an F for accuracy here. From an evasion perspective, going with a D here, not an evade unit at all. Movement, I'm going with a B. Really should be an A though. He's got 2 different passives that change his movement potential. One is a move +1, one is a jump +1, and he's got a buff on the Dragoon sub-job that's both move and jump +1. So a lot of different potential movement options, which obviously those that watch the channel, I'm a big fan of. Now passive abilities, going with an A- here. Flexible passives, and all of them potentially change your build options in terms of who you're targeting, how you're going to build him externally outside of his kit. We'll talk about that more in a couple slides. The counter abilities, going with an A+ here. He has 2 exceptional counters. I think both have a solid case to be made. Overall kit though, I'm going with a B+. I do think he's got a ton of strong damage. That's absolutely his forte. The utility, in my opinion, is just a little bit vanilla though when you compare him to some of the other characters here. And overall, this is the thing I've had the most struggle with. I'm going with a B for a final grade. Now I do think he's a very strong third-year unit. He's better than 95% of the damage dealers out there just because of the power creep of the game. I don't think he's exceptional though when you look at some of the other more recent damage dealers that have come out. Ed Elric, King Bradley, Winged Stern, Sephiroth, obviously, Yuffie. And the lack of innate AoE resistance actually is very concerning for me, where yes, he's got 15 unit resistance, yes, he's got a ton of HP, but without that strong innate AoE resistance, which is where the meta is currently and seems to be for quite some time now, he is not going to fare well in the short term. And obviously, when people are thinking about meta implications, there's a very strong Earth presence right now, which certainly goes against bringing a lightning unit to the fight. And that may not be a huge concern, but we're also getting Dialdo coming out here soon to further increase the Earth meta. We're also getting Dark Golem, which is going to solidify that as well. And we're also getting Bridal Alaya, who is another lightning unit in the future, who's basically better at everything than Viga. And we'll talk about that more through the presentation. So overall, I'm relatively unimpressed. Again, superb post-third year character, but when I'm looking at all these characters that have come out and are about to come out, I think he's a step below, and hopefully I can convince you why through the rest of this. So the passive abilities, there's 3 here that I think you're mainly going to play with. One is Carnage and Obsession, Martialist Lore is the second, Battlefield Mobility is the third. Now, Carnage and Obsession and Martialist Lore, 2 different trade-offs here. Both of them give you attack of 24%. Carnage and Obsession gives you an extra 12 defense I mentioned, but they both give you a different type of penetration. One is slash res pen, the other is defense pen. And you really do have to pick and choose which one you would prefer here, and there are multiple different ways in which you might gear him. And I'll spoiler alert it now. On the main job, he gets another 40 slash res pen. On the sub-job, he's got an ability that gives him 40 defense pen. And there's a bunch of external things as well, which give additional penetrations. Dark Ifrit vision card, the Esther vision card. So it's really just a decision of what sub-job do you want to have, what vision cards do you want to have, so that you can achieve either that slash res pen or the defense pen. And obviously that changes too if you're taking him to mainly counter evade units, you don't need a lot of defense pen. If you're taking him against tanks, you probably do. I do think the battlefield mobility for the agility is also obviously one of my favorites. I think you can probably combine 2 of these different ones safely, or quite honestly, these top 2 are very potent in that obviously you'll have the bulk, the penetrations, and the attack. So I think there's a case to be made for all of them. The jump +1 is niche to certain maps, but it's a nice option to have. And Dragoon Lore actually is very good considering he has some healing potential in his kit and very high base HP. It's just not nearly as good as these others. Now the counter abilities, 2 exceptional ones here. Give It To Me is a 4-range counter ability. It's an 80% chance to proc. It'll do typeless damage of 165%. It's 100% hit chance, and it will absorb 30% of the damage done. So a big part of his potential survivability in being able to constantly react to how people are doing damage to him. Nice that he has some of that innate self-sustain. He also has, though, the physical reflex here, which obviously is very powerful in its own right. I do think Give It To Me is probably more practical in terms of what he's supposed to be doing, but physical reflex obviously is strong as well. There's a case to be made for both. Now we look at the main job buffs. This is part of the initial difficulty we'll see with this AI here. His main priority buff is Hatred Reborn. It's that strike and magic res of 20%. This is a teammate buff. It's also a re-raise to self. Now there are some AI problems here where it depends on whether there's a teammate nearby or not, because if there's not, he'll actually prefer his courage ability as far as I understand it on the sub job, but it's only if you have that sub job on. But no matter what, third priority is Veil of Loathing, which is the 70% physical damage barrier. So you have some things to consider in terms of initial movement, depending upon if there's a teammate nearby, if you have courage or re-raise on, if you've a different sub jump on, if you have a TMR in there somewhere. But overall, not the worst thing in the world to have many buffs to choose from. It's just that you usually only get one or two off, so you have to be kind of picky. Now we look at the main job offensive abilities. Just some real quick hits here. 2 unit-based abilities, 2 AoE abilities, the max range of 5 squares away. They're all lightning slash oriented. And so getting into these now, Paralyzing Axe, got a status effect here to paralyze. That's why there's some debate on that 70 or 97 faith. Same thing with this limit break, as we'll see. So this is a good solid base ability, nothing wrong with that. Grudge Bear is really, though, one of his best abilities. Not only is this a 25% defense break, but it's also a 100% chance to hit, 200% modifier that will get stronger the more times he gets hit. So if he gets hit once or twice, he'll get 37% for each, up to 75%, meaning max single target modifier of 275%. That's obviously exceptionally strong. Now, Devastation Rend is the ability that he'll typically open up the fight with because this is 40 slash res pen on it. So this will, in terms of damage, max damage in the first turn will be one of the first things you use. 165% mod, it's a decreased CT of 200. So a nice way to maybe get a turn order advantage early on in the fight. He will typically not spam this though, as far as I can tell. Once you've used it once, you'll likely move on to Mortal Severance as the other ability here, which is Dispel Re-Raise on a cross-shaped AoE, another 100% hit chance for a 200% mod. So again, when I talk about little vanilla for utility, that defense break at 25 is fine, but a lot of characters have it. There's a lot of debuff resistance as well for defense break. The decreased CT of 200 actually is very nice, but I don't think he's going to spam it over and over, just from a priority perspective. The AoE Re-Raise Dispel is fine, but a lot of characters have that nowadays. So again, it's okay, but just a little less special. And although the 100% hit chance certainly is nice, there obviously is also many other characters that are using that nowadays. So in terms of other kinds of utility, I don't necessarily see a ton here that he offers that many other characters don't already. It's really one of those characters that's meant to just live a very long time and do damage and not die. And honestly, sometimes that works. Now we look at the sub job here. Servant of the Void, I don't really care for the sub job. Heal Splitter is a 20% agility debuff. It's another AoE, a little bit shorter range. It's not considerably cheaper from an AP perspective, so I don't think it really adds much of value. Unfeeling Jealousy, though, is another interesting one where it plays with some of his HP restoration, but in terms of practically speaking for auto PvP, you're never going to be using this. You're going to be using instead the Martialist sub job. Now, there's a ton to like about here. Number one, it's strike type damage, so you get another valuable source of weapon types. Number two, this is where that courage ability comes in, and it's a ton of AP that you generate from using this ability. Obviously, the intent is for him to use re-raise on himself, get some resistances, use some courage as well, so that even if an enemy dispels one, they typically can't dispel both, other than really Sephiroth, right? But in addition to that, Pierce the Heavens is the real shining star of this, where this is that defense pen of 40 that I was talking about. It's another AoE 165% modifier that will get higher if the unit has an AP restoration on or a defense buff on. So, talk about strike type damage, courage, the defense pen. This is really the best thing about his sub job. I don't really see a strong case why you'd equip something else, but if we're doing an honorable mention for the Dragoon, Dragon's Kin is a buff that obviously you can't ignore for any character that has it. Attack of 42%, protect for self, crit rate 25, which we know is a weakness of his, that helps a lot. Reaction block rate of 100, which he does not have anywhere in his kit. All of these things are super valuable from a buff perspective. I just don't know if it's strong enough to overcome the benefit from the Martialist job, but you have some options to play with. I just think that's my personal recommendation. The Dragon Standard, while a good buff, I don't think you're using an auto PvP. That's really more for strategic manual or PvE, and the rest of the abilities, honestly, I don't think are that strong for what he has compared to the rest of the kit. Now for the limit break, this is bar none one of the best limit breaks in the game. That being said, the only demerit is that it's a 3 range away, so very short range. So you have some AP concerns that by the time it gets close enough to use this, you got to make sure you have enough AP left. But it not only is it a giant AoE dispel, but a 67% chance to inflict Berserk as well. So by itself, either one of these, either the Dispel or the Berserk, would be good enough for just a regular limit break, but you get both on an AoE like this. Very, very potent. This is an absolute fight changer. So 2 thumbs up for this limit break overall. Again, just some AP concerns and making sure you have enough by the time you get there in that fight. Now we look at the mastery ability. He gets 15 attack and acquired AP of 30%, so that does help a little bit in making sure you have that proper AP generation. For the dream ability, an extra 15% HP and the 15 unit resistance. So overall, really leaning into those strengths of getting him some HP and some bulk, while also making sure that he has some increased modifiers to help both the strike type damage and the slash type damage, because again, lightning attack applies to both. Now for the TMR review, this is actually a very, very good TMR. It's unfortunate, it's only one use, but it's an accessory, which I love. Obviously you can equip multiple accessories, but only one cloth or armor, so you have to pick and choose. But the TMR skill of this is an absolute game changer in that it is another form of protect to self for 3 turns, but also for 3 turns gives you the chance to inflict Berserk on an enemy. And that's either off a basic attack or just an ability attack. And the way this works is it won't stack with other forms of Berserk. So for instance, someone like Eliza has a 25% Berserk chance on her basic AP ability. This will not be 25 plus 25. It'll instead basically roll the dice twice. So it'll do it once for her regular ability, and then it'll roll it again twice. And if she gets Berserked either one of those times, obviously she's Berserked. This obviously can be countered pretty hard by a 25% Berserk resistance rune, but most people aren't gearing for that. And if you can Berserk someone early in the fight, basically taking them out. Now, for my general thoughts overall, I wanted to really hone in on the creativity that you need to have behind the penetrations, which not all people have the resources to do this, or just the the theory crafting to do so. From a slash res pen perspective, you can get 40 from the passive, as you saw, 40 from the main job ability. You can get 35 from the Esper vision card, which is a massive game changer here in global that JP does not have. You can also get up to 10 from a Truststone passive, or 20 from a different axe. So you have a few different ways to either get from 80 to 100. Obviously, you have some decisions to be made whether or not you want like this 75 permanent slash res pen and still get the 40, which will put you above 100, which is fine though, because it fades after 3 turns. But you have to get a little creative with what threshold you want to get at when you also try to balance the defense pen options, where you get 40 from the passive, 40 from the martialist ability. You technically get 25 on the main subslot from Dark Ifrit vision card. I think that goes down to 13 in the subslot, and you can get another 10 from a Truststone passive. So again, you really need to balance your internal passives, your external equipment as well, and then you even get into fun theory crafting with characters like Hyo, who overlap with the Dark Ifrit vision card from a fire and lightning perspective. That Hyo gives 40 defense pen on his buff to a teammate. So there's a lot of different ways to cut the cake here. So again, it's a good thing to have, but probably a little bit difficult to execute in practice, which in the broad scheme of the game tends to not be a good thing for the average player. Even for top end players, it just makes it a little more convoluted to make a character work. Now, despite the high effective HP, I do have some major concerns about the lack of any AoE resistance whatsoever. I think that's going to be noticeable, that even though he has a higher HP, he's going to be taking more damage, so net effect realistically about the same. I also think the lack of barrier break is concerning. Now, I think it's a key downfall for him. Obviously, if you're running him with someone like Alphonse, not a huge deal, because Alphonse himself has that barrier break to kind of complement it, but there's also no protect dispel, there's no slash or lightning apparel, only that 25 defense break. There's no chain damage like multi-hit abilities in his kit to amplify damage that way. So I think there's enough ways to mitigate damage out there from him that, although sure, you can get some very high modifiers and the attack stats pretty good, I am concerned in 2023, when lots of people have these survivability means, that he doesn't really have enough to dispel them reliably. So I've some tempered expectations upon what the actual damage output would be. Then again, if he lives long enough and can just keep doing that consistent damage, it might not be a problem. Now, I do think he fits a nice niche of being great for anti-evade, kind of similar to Resol in that regard, where, a little squishier with some different means of self-sustain to try to outlast those evade units while having some guaranteed hits and high accuracy. Obviously, the same can be said for someone like Ed Elric, who kind of shines in that same regard. But again, you have to consider some of that, null sure hit ability too, and what that's going to do for the first interaction, but I wouldn't be that all concerned. He will likely be semi-difficult to manage from an AI and movement perspective, perspective. Again, a lot of different buffs to choose from. Depending on the map, you're going to have to pick and choose which ones you want to have to give up. I do think the utility, as I mentioned, is somewhat limited and repetitive for what other characters seem to have nowadays. The re-razor move, very nice. A lot of characters have it. 25 defense break, really nice. A lot of characters have it and can easily be debuffed from what some characters have innately. The strike and magic res at 20% is noteworthy though. The AoE CT down of 200 is also very nice, but I don't think you're going to spam that ability compared to some of the others once you've used it once. And the dispel and the limit break is very powerful, but again, only 3 squares away. Got to make sure you have the AP. It's only good for one fight. So it's really good, but I think just a step behind what some other characters do. Now, he also has lots of access to lightning mods where, again, 15 from the mastery, you'll get another 30 on his axe weapon that we'll see, and the extra mods on that second ability as he takes damage. So he is pretty self-sufficient and not requiring a lot of external mods. Obviously, the more you give him, the better, but it is kind of a nice thing that he's not reliant on a bunch of vision cards or whatnot to give him those modifiers. And the meta timing is obviously a massive concern where we're just seeing so much earth. The ceiling for him in the short term is very, very limited. And even in the long term, once Bridal Alaya comes out, she's just going to replace him in most teams that you would use. I think she's just a straight up upgrade and better than him in every single way. Now, we look at the job-based vision cards. There's actually a couple here for a good framework innately of what you can put together. You have 2 different unit resistance cards. You have a 15% agility card. Those are some of the bare bones foundations, but some of the rest of these, they're okay. Maybe not amazing for him, though. It's noteworthy that there's no AoE resistance card, and although sure, you can still use something like Death Machine or Holiday Party to do that, we still do that frequently for mingling these elements. I don't think there's quite yet a strong multi-element team that he deserves to be in. We haven't got any extra axe type vision cards in the future in JP. Then again, when you're thinking long-term too, you have to be a little open-minded about what could potentially come in the future. Now for the Esper Synergies, obviously focus the lightning attack and the human killer, where both of those will work on his slash and strike attacks. Slash attack certainly is the third priority. Everything else is matchup specific. I do think an honorable mention for accuracy, despite the fact that he has a 100% hit chance. Like I said, you don't want him to be so inaccurate that he's like missing on a tank that has a little bit of luck. You just don't want that to happen. Obviously, King Coral that's coming next week is the best Esper for him, but really and truly, Dark Bahamut, Odin, and Chaos Odin all offer very unique and interesting things as well, depending upon the resistances, the human killer, the accuracy, whatever kind of utility you want to go for. These top 4 are by far the best. And just for some honorable mention, if you really are going for some lightning-oriented ones, I do think Scorpion Sentinel, Aegion in particular for the Pierce res, where that's his 5% weakness, but even characters like Coral and Dark Ramu can come in a pinch there where their boards are relatively strong, but I think the top 4 are the best for him overall. Now for the weapon optimization, the weapon that came out for him I do think is the best one, the Black Dragon Great Cleaver. This is 30 lightning attack, 15 slash attack, 164 attack on the assault build. I think that's really all you need, quite honestly. I think an honorable mention as a second weapon though is the Gigantaxe that came out for no other reason than the aim build on this, where you get 25 accuracy, you get another 10 on the board stat. Attack stat at 146 is not a major fall off from that previous axe, and although you lose that 30 modifier and the 15 slash attack, you get 20 slash attack res penetration here, and you can still get lightning attack and slash attack on Truststone passive, so you can still min-max a couple different ways. This is really just an alternative if you don't want to use an Alexandrite ring or some other kind of potential accuracy in the equipment, but at least an honorable mention. And I do think a very good TMR option is the Miraga TMR here, where this will give him an initial starting AP of 25, which as we mentioned is very important to use that limit break late in the fight. And if you're min-maxing attack stats, this is a great way to do it. I think another honorable mention is the Cyrell TMR. This one is an increase of AP of 20 when you perform a critical hit, but again, he's not a strong critical hit unit, so I wouldn't rely on this. So honorable mention, but not my favorite. The Miraga TMR is definitely the number 1 from a TMR perspective. And that's the Viga review in a nutshell. Again, there's a lot of really solid things here. He's honestly a very, very solid character, despite what people think when I give someone a B rating. But again, if you're choosing where you're allocating your Vizier, you're looking ahead to what Lightning has in the future. You're looking at the short term where you're going to potentially use them. Viga just kind of strikes out in a bunch of different ways, so I'm relatively underwhelmed, but obviously still give him a thumbs up. He's a very good character at the end of the day. But that's my thoughts for now. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to y'all soon.